Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by offering you a really warm welcome to the CAD Club webinar today. And my colleague Simon and I are actually going to turn our cameras on to start with, so you'll be able to see us for the first part of this this webinar, and then we will turn our cameras off just so that you have the sort of full screen for the slides and the demonstration. And then during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, we'll turn the cameras back on and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'd like to just start by offering you all really warm welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join the webinar today from CAD Corp. This is part of a series of webinars that we've been running about all aspects of GIS and web mapping and cloud hosting. So thank you so much for attending. Today's webinar is entitled GIS and Crime Analysis. Just to let you all know, you are joined in listen-only mode, which means you are muted, but there is a questions panel with GoToWebinar, so you can ask questions at any point throughout the webinar. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this Q&A session at the end where we'll deal with as many questions as we can. The plan is, and we will stick to this plan, we'll be definitely finished by 12 o'clock or maybe a bit before that, and you can all crack on with your days. Okay, let us get started. I'm just going to kick off just with some housekeeping. We will be sending you this recording. So after the webinar today, you'll get an email with a copy of the recording. So don't worry too much about taking notes. You'll be seeing this recording, which you can look at again if you want to, or you can share with colleagues. Like I mentioned, please do submit questions as we go along. It would be great to get some sort of interaction in the Q&A session, and we'll try our very best to answer as many questions as we can. If we run out of time, or if we think the questions are perhaps too technical or too involved for this type of session, then myself or one of my colleagues will get back to you either later on this afternoon or later this week with answers to any questions that we don't get a chance to cover. At the end of the webinar today, we will be completing an exit survey, which we'd really appreciate if you do complete, because it gives us some feedback on what you think of the content. And when we're planning the future series of CAD Club webinars, we'll be looking at that exit survey to get some ideas. There's also in the exit survey, there's a prompt for any follow-up as well. So if you after this session today, if you want more information about training or more information about any of the things, any of the techniques, any of the crime techniques we show you, then make a note in the survey, and again myself and one of my colleagues will follow that up. Before we get started, we thought we'd just do some introductions, so you should be able to see myself and Simon. I think I'm looking a bit older than I did in that photo, but I've been at CAD Club for many years. I'm the sales director of CAD Club, but I also take particular responsibility for the account management of many of our emergency services customers, which includes our police forces. And our police forces have been doing lots of really interesting things with crime analysis, and we've used some of those ideas in the webinar today. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's Simon Parker. I'm a pre-sales team lead at CAD Corp. And this morning I'll be demonstrating sort of a number of sort of crime analysis techniques in desktop GIS software, and I'll also touch upon some of the sort of different ways you can share that data and analysis to a wider audience.
Excellent, thank you, Simon. So we'll turn our cameras off now, and we'll see you all again at the end of the webinar and the Q&A session. So when I was looking at the delegate list earlier, we've got over 100 people attending today, which is superb. And in the delegate list, it was probably about 2/3 of people that know CAD Corp and that we've either customers or we've met before, and about 1/3 of people that are new to the organisation. So I did think it'd be useful just to include this one slide just to tell you a bit about CAD Corp. So we're a UK-based developer of GIS and web mapping software. The name of our suite of software is called CAD Club Spatial Information Systems, or CAD Club SIS for short. And CAD Club SIS is available on the web, on mobile, and on desktop GIS applications. We also provide a range of services, training and consultancy and project management, and also increasingly cloud hosting as well. So any of the software that we show today can be hosted in the cloud by CAD Club. We are fortunate enough to work in lots of different industry sectors, which makes mine and Simon's jobs really interesting because we get to meet either, in the old days it was in face-to-face, or now online. We get to meet lots of different types of organisations, and they're listed at the bottom of the slide. Today we're particularly focusing on emergency services, so the audience is certainly over 50% police forces, because obviously they have a particular close interest in crime mapping. But we're also joined by lots of local authorities, and part of their remit as well is to look at antisocial behaviour and the mapping of crime. And I did notice actually a few housing associations on the list as well. So when housing associations are planning their housing stock, they're always also interested in looking at stats for crime analysis and taking that into account when they're planning their housing estate. What we thought we'd do is we thought we'd start off with a couple of poll questions. It's really useful for Simon and I to get more of a feel for who's joined the webinar and what your experience is with some of the subjects we're going to talk about. So I'm going to launch the first poll question now, which is asking if you're currently using GIS for crime analysis. So I'm just going to leave that running just for a few seconds while we wait for the responses to come in, and that is I'll pause that now. So we've got 55% are currently using GIS for crime analysis. So that is yes, really interesting. And today, hopefully, you'll get to see some new techniques that you've perhaps not used before. And the other 45% haven't used GIS for crime mapping. And when we put the content together, we did very much plan it for audiences with different levels of experience. Okay, I've got one more poll question that I'm going to share, so I'm just going to launch that now again, just to get some interaction. And this is asking if you're currently using web mapping as well for distributing crime mapping, because that's a popular technique for sharing data, for sharing maps and analysis internally or externally in the organisation. And actually, that's really interesting. So 2/3 of people aren't currently using web mapping for sharing crime analysis, and 1/3 are. So when we get onto the presentation shortly, I think we're covering sort of 7 key points. The first 6 points are all about desktop GIS, but then we are going to share some techniques for using web mapping to share crime analysis. So I'm going to close that poll now, and we're going to go back to the presentation. But thank you for taking part in that. That was really useful. So I thought it'd be good just to start off with what the aim of this webinar. So when we were planning our series of webinars, and this webinar in particular, the aim that we came up for this webinar was to provide a practical introduction to GIS crime analysis. It's the presentation, the main sort of demonstration is, say, half an hour, so it is very much an introduction. So we're going to introduce 6 sort of key techniques that can be used for within GIS for crime analysis. If you do want more information about any of those techniques, then please do use the follow-up questionnaire to ask for more information, or the Q&A session as we get to that section will be really useful. But it's very much an introduction session. We're going to start off by talking about desktop GIS, obviously following on from that poll question. And we're going to be looking at 5 key different types of maps that are used with desktop GIS for crime analysis. So we're looking at thematic maps. We're looking at different options for hotspot maps, and I'm going to mention some of the pros and cons shortly. We're going to be looking at temporal maps, because it's also, as well as looking at crime over space, it's really good to look at crime over time as well. So we've got some techniques for that. We're going to be looking at routing based analysis using a product from the Ordnance Survey called the Ordnance Survey Highways Network. And we're going to finish off with a more advanced technique using a process map to create a macro of different GIS operations. And then at the end of the presentation, Simon's going to move over to web mapping. And that's again following on from the poll question we had. Web mapping is used for providing maps and crime analysis through a browser. It's ideal tool for sharing data either internally or externally. There's a great widget that comes with web mapping called Local Knowledge, which is just perfect for crime mapping because it tells you specifically about what's happening in an area of interest, either by searching on the address or by using a mobile device, which is also part of web mapping, so mobile mapping. And finally, what we've found from our customers is that probably over the last 12 months, really, a really popular tool for crime mapping is been using a PowerBI visual, and we'll be talking about the work that CAD Club's done to support, particularly using OSGB, so Ordnance Survey, Great Britain data and coordinates within Power BI visuals. So we'll be talking about that. So I think the audience here today, you'll be familiar that for a long time, crime analysts have been carrying out spatial analysis, and originally that would have been done by putting pins on a map. And I know some of our customers may still have pins on maps in their offices, but that was a traditional technique. And then GIS came along, and that allowed us to put lots and lots and lots of points on a map. So it might be thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of points on a map. But we need tools to make sense of that. And thematic maps is a great option for making sense of lots of data. And in CAD Club software, we have lots of options for thematic maps. So it might be as simple as adding a label to a point, or colouring them in based on an attribute, or creating a bar chart or a pie chart, or there's an example in that screenshot of a graduated theme. I was looking at COVID stats on the BBC website earlier this morning, and they had a thematic map using a graduated theme to represent the data. What Simon's going to be showing us in the presentation is going to be using, I think, just picking on one example of a thematic map using a range theme, but we'll be introducing the concept of thematic maps generally. Often with thematic maps, and certainly with the range theme that Simon will be using, they are traditionally constrained by a boundary. So you might be looking at a theme of data within a ward or a beat area, for example. But one of the good things about using hotspot maps is they're not confined by those same boundaries, which can be really useful. Often crime analysts might have used techniques for hotspot mapping, maybe called grid analysis, where you put a grid on and you count the number of points within a map, or a technique called kernel density estimation, or KDE. But in the last major release of CAD Club software, we added to that repertoire of hotspot techniques by adding a technique called GIStar, which has a number of benefits over the more subjective KDE and grid analysis, where crime analysts can colour in the hotspot maps based on a relative score. The GIStar allows you to base the map on statistical confidence, so it's really useful for crime analysis, and it works particularly well in smaller areas as well. So Simon is going to be showing us the GIStar spot for creating sort of statistically based hotspot maps. Also, actually, in the latest major release of CAD Club software, we introduced support for temporal maps. So looking at crime data over time is really important. And Simon is going to be giving us an example of how we can use queries over time, how we can use a slider bar to look at how data's changed over time, but also output that to a video, because a really important part of any crime analyst job is sharing information with stakeholders in the organisation or external to that organisation, and creating videos based upon crime analysis over time is one technique that can be really useful for that. As well as looking at data maybe in hotspots or thematic maps, a really useful analysis technique that gets used a lot by our customers is routing analysis or producing routing maps. So this might be using the Ordnance Survey highways data, which is available as part of the public sector geospatial agreement. And now some of our customers have added to that data using the travel speed data, the average speed data that the Ordnance Survey also supply. That's not part of the PSGA, but if anybody's interested in that, then fill the information on the Q&A session at the end, or the exit survey at the end, and we can supply more information about the travel speed data and provide a quote if it's something that's of interest to you. But routing analysis can be used in lots of different forms. So it might be as simple as looking at a single route. So you know that a suspect was spotted in a particular location and you want to look at a possible route to a crime, for example. So that could be a simple form of routing analysis. A more complicated option that is available in GIS software is doing multi-point routing, where you might select lots of locations, so maybe multiple locations of suspects, and lots of other locations, maybe crimes, and look for possible routes that might have been taken. A technique that's really useful again for route mapping is creating travel time isochrones. So how far could you travel along a particular network, either for crimes or even mapping for your own response times, for example. And when we get to the demonstration part, Simon's going to pick up on just a few of these examples. So he's going to look at possible routes and also combining that with a spatial query. And I won't steal Simon's thunder. He can show you the spatial query that he's going to perform, and you can maybe take some ideas about route mapping away from the webinar today. And the final type of map that we're going to be looking at in desktop GIS is a process map. Simon's going to look at this. He's actually going to look at this twice. He's going to look at the end of the desktop session, but he's also going to use it within the hotspot section as well. And this is a more advanced technique which uses the query dialog box you can see on the screen for creating a macro of operations. And the example that Simon is going to be using at the end of the desktop session is for cell site analysis. So he's going to be looking at 4 different cell towers. He's going to be looking at the range that's published against those cell towers and allow that to create the intersecting area. And he's going to do that as part of a process where he can set up the process. He can press one button and he can run that sort of macro of operations. And these can be used in lots of different ways. So maybe today, hopefully you might get some ideas of how you could use process maps within your organization. And then the final part of the presentation, Simon's going to jump over to web mapping, and he's got a few examples up his sleeve that he's going to share with us this morning. So just looking at some of these images. So the image on the top right is looking at CAD Club WebMap application, which Simon's going to be using to share data. He's also going to be giving an example of the PowerBI visual, which is the image on the top left, where we can interact with data and we can use data directly as eastings and northings, which is really important. So we're not having to translate that to latitude and longitude, and we're using a stack of Ordnance Survey data, including the master map building level data. A product in the bottom left, which we're not actually sharing today, but if you want more information, then add that to the follow-up questionnaire or look on our website. It's a product called Notice Board, which is a way of sharing information and spatial data in notices, and not necessarily on maps. They can include maps if you want, but it's looking at notices of spatial data. And then the final image on that slide is the bottom right, which is looking at this tool that I mentioned earlier called Local Knowledge, which is an ideal way of summarizing crime analysis data for sharing with stakeholders who may not be as technical as some of the analysts out there will be. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Simon, and we're going to have this sort of interactive sort of demonstration of the features that we've just mentioned.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning to you all again. So I'll just share my screen and then I'll make us start my demonstration. Great, okay. Yep, so this morning I'm going to be demonstrating a number of techniques for analysing crime data in GIS software, but I'll also touch upon some of the ways you can also share that data and analysis to a wide audience as well. So I'm going to start my demonstration with CAD Corp Sys desktop, which has got lots of functionality which is suitable for analysts to view, theme and analyze data. And in this project on the left hand side, I've got a number of data layers which I'll be using throughout my demonstration, and they are all supported by background mapping from the Ordnance Survey, which we can see here in the map window. So let's take a look at the first example. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to turn on my crime data. And this is data that I've downloaded from the Police UK website for the Plymouth area in Devon for February this year. And there's just, simple points on the map. We can see the geographical spread of crimes across the city. And from this perspective, you might be able to distinguish areas where there may have been a lot of crime. So we might say this area here, which is kind of the city centre of Plymouth, there appears to be sort of a cluster of reported crimes. But beyond, just viewing data like this as simple points on the map, there are sort of other ways or better ways to visualize the data. And my first example is thematic mapping. So on the left-hand side in my project, I've also got some wall boundaries. So I want to analyze the distribution of these crimes that have occurred by counting how many have occurred within each of these ward areas. And to perform that analysis, we've got a really simple to use wizard. So against my ward layer, I'm going to launch that wizard, which gives me this count option here. And I simply just select the layer that I want to count. So that is the crime data. And then when I click finish, that analysis is done. So really easy to perform. And then at the top, if we use this get info button here, click on a ward, what we now have against the ward is this new column, which gives us the count of crimes from the crime layer. So we can see there are 68 crimes within this Compton ward. Now with that analysis, we can theme the results against the ward layer to show the distribution of crimes as a thematic map. And to do that, we have another wizard called our Add Theme Wizard, and we use a lot of wizards in our software just to make tasks like this, really easy. So I'm going to select my ward layer, and as Gary mentioned, there's loads of different theming options available. The example today is going to be my range theme, and we're going to base that on the column that we've just created with that analysis, which counts the number of crimes within each of those wards. It then finds all of the values. And then at this point, we can decide how we want to group the data. So I'm going to divide the data into 5 groups, loads of different ways to divide the data. I'm just going to choose them an equal count today and round the values up to the nearest 10. And then for the final part of the wizard, we just style how we want our thematic map to look. So I'm going to choose a black outline. And then for the main colors, I want to choose a color ramp from our color brewer. And I'm going to choose sort of a green to red color ramp. So the red identifies areas where there have been a high number of crimes. So if I now hit finish, and if I just turn off the crime data off for a moment, the result of that thematic mapping shows sort of the red areas around the city centre and to the west, where we have high numbers of crimes compared to other areas in the city here. Also in this project, I've also prepared a label theme. So if I turn that label theme on, this is basically going to show us a count of all of the crimes within these wards. And one of the benefits of theming data in Sys desktop is that the themes are dynamic. So if the underlying data changes, then all the themes update accordingly. So just to show you that concept, I'm going to just add some new crimes into my crimes layer, and I'm going to add these crimes into this particular ward here. So at the moment, there are 28 crimes within that ward. As soon as I add a new record as a new crime into that data, we can see the label theme is updated automatically, and it's jumped from 28 to 29. And if I just add one more into that ward area, this time we've hit a new threshold with the range theme. So we can see it's jumped to 30, but the ward has also changed color as well. And you can imagine this working really well when you're connecting to data, which could be coming from your data warehouse. That data is being updated by those systems, but that data can be consumed and visualized on the fly within the GIS. So thematic mapping is just one approach to visualizing crime data. However, as Gary mentioned, crime isn't necessarily defined or constrained by boundaries. So let me show you a different approach using hotspot analysis. Now, using the same crime data here, I've already produced a hotspot using kernel density estimation. And this technique is used to kind of identify hotspots based on the distribution of crime. And the results of my hotspot analysis here show sort of red and yellow areas here, which stand out as locations with high distribution of crimes. However, when it comes to crime data, KDE might not necessarily be the preferred approach, but maybe a more statistical approach using either sort of geographical or spatial association. And amongst crime analysts, that popular approach is GIStar. And that method basically identifies clusters of crime which are statistically significant. So against the for the Plymouth area, I've got a grid here of hexagons to cover my area of interest. And the first stage of GIStar is to simply aggregate the data. So against each of these hexagons, I've already counted the number of crimes for my crime layer that fall within each of those hexagons. So it's basically a repeat of the same analysis I just showed you by counting the number of crimes within the ward boundaries. Then using that count, I can create a new hotspot with Getis-Ord-Gi. So this will be my first visit to the processing operations this morning. And this is where you can bundle a number of GIS operations together into a single workflow. And one of those operations is Getis-Ord-Gi, which I've now added to my process on the right-hand side. Then within this, we've got a number of parameters to define. So for our expression, we're simply choosing the column which has got the count of the crimes within each of the hexagons. For our neighbours, we want to consider the number of crimes in the neighbouring hexagon. So as a hexagon has 6 sides, we're going to change that value to 6. And then for the spatial relationship, we're going to use the k nearest neighbours spatial relationship. I'm then going to create the output of this process as a new layer. So we're going to call this Getis-Ord-Gi and then hit finish. Excuse me. So the output is another hexagon grid, but the GIStar process basically adds 2 new columns into the layer. So if I go back and use the get info command and click on a hexagon, we can see the p-value and the z-score. So for every hexagon, we can see the p-value, and so the closer that value to 0 that is, then the higher the probability the hotspot or cold spot is genuine, or the z-score indicates a positive number for a hotspot with high levels of incidence, and a negative value is basically a cold spot. But using that z-score, we can use this to visualize the hotspot areas, but also show sort of the level of statistical significance that those hotspots are actually genuine. And because these levels are based on a standardized range of values, as an analyst, you can apply a saved theme of those values to your data. So back to our add theme wizard, we're going to select the Getis-Ord layer. I'm going to select a saved theme, and this has got my significance levels against the z-score, and we can apply that to the layer. Then on the left-hand side, I can just open up the legend so we can see the colors and the significant levels. But then on the map, we can see sort of the red hexagons, which represent the hotspots, which are 99.9% significant. So we can say we're statistically confident that these are actually hotspots of crime. And in comparison to the thematic map which I showed you, where we had sort of large areas of sort of red ward areas as being having high levels of crime, using this technique, we've identified sort of smaller geographical areas where there are high crime rates, and we can then use this information to focus resources in these particular areas. And that was an example of hotspot analysis. So I showed you an example of kernel density estimation, and then Getis-Ord-Gi to analyze crime data in a different way compared to the thematic map example. So crime Also, time is a key variable when analysing crime patterns and trends, and there is functionality in GIS Desktop which enables you to query and display data by time. So on the map, we've got all of my crime data, and against each of those crimes, I've got a date timestamp for the offence. And in the temporal window at the bottom here, we've got our date range filters. So here I can filter data that were committed on a specific date, and it's actually remembered my filter from my previous visit. So if I apply that, what it's doing is it's showing me all of the crimes that occurred on the 1st of February 2021. And we can see on the map there's no sort of real pattern. There's quite a spread of crimes on this date across the city. Alternatively, underneath here, you can look at crimes that occurred between two dates. So here I'm looking at crimes that were reported over a particular weekend in February. And looking at this data, you might say there's a bit of clustering here of crimes in and around the city centre over this particular weekend. So those are just two ways that you can easily filter crime data by time, but there's also an additional option to create playback videos of data as well using this time slider option. And because my data is for the month of February, I'm going to view the data on a day-by-day basis. But you've got loads of options there to choose your time period for your videos. And if I hit play and just keep this on a loop, what it basically does is it just goes through every day in my data, and I can see a simulation of when and where these crimes occurred. And as Gary mentioned, you do have options to export any of these sort of simulations or videos out to a video file as well. So these videos can also be shared outside of the GIS. And so this is just another way of visualizing the data. And if it does reveal patterns in specific areas, then that can only be a good thing, because then that information can then be used to deploy those police resources in the right areas. And then just to conclude my sort of temporal analysis example this morning, here I've analysed all crime. However, using our query builder at the top of the interface, you can actually focus your analysis on specific crime type. So my data has got a crime type column, and I'm going to filter the data by drug-related crime. So we can now see all of the drug-related crime on the map, and then I can use the same temporal analysis, hotspot mapping, and thematic mapping to focus my analysis on specific crime types. Again, just to see if there's any sort of geographical patterns to where these particular crimes have occurred. So I'm now going to show you a different type of analysis, and this time we're going to be looking at routing analysis. Now, CAD Club provides a free routing tools add-in, which comes with a variety of routing techniques. And as Gary mentioned earlier, there was loads of different examples for utilising these routing tools. But for my example today, I want to find some potential routes from a suspect's address to a scene of a crime. And I want to find out which CCTV cameras may have captured that suspect on their way to commit that crime. So we can then go and gather that potential evidence. So for my example here, I've got the location of the suspect's address. I've also got the location of the crime. We've got CCTV locations on the map as well. And then finally, we've also got the Ordnance Survey highways network layer, which I'm going to be using for my routing analysis. Then in my routing tools, I'm going to use our measure route option to find the quickest route between these two locations. So I'm going to click the start location, which is the suspect's address, and then the end location, which is the location of the crime. And then what it does is it produces the quickest route between those two locations. And if I just turn off the network layer, we can see where that route is. Now, using that route, we can apply a buffer to it. So let's select the route on the map, and under our analysis tab, we're going to create a buffer of, say, 30 meters. And then using that buffer, we want to find all the CCTVs that are present along that route. So we can go back to our query builder, but this time against my CCTV data, we're going to perform a spatial query. So we're going to find all of the cameras that intersect that buffer. And when I apply that filter, we've now got all the cameras which may have picked up that suspect if they traveled along that particular route. You can also consider other routes as well. So here I've used tools to find the quickest routes, but you can also find the shortest route between the two locations as well. So the shortest route here is the blue line, and the quickest route, which we just calculated, is the red line. So we can maybe check out CCTV cameras along this particular route as well. Or alternatively, you may have had intelligence that a suspect's car was captured by a static ANPR camera. So here is the location of that static camera. We can then maybe apply no-go areas. So these are my no entry signs. So we want to disregard some parts of our road network shown by these no entry signs. And then factoring in that ANPR location, we can create a route based on that ANPR hit and then find the CCTV cameras along this route as well. So that was just one example of using the routing tools in CAD Corp SIS Desktop. And for the final use case in SIS Desktop, we're going to be looking at cell site analysis. And cell site analysis may be required to find out which telecommunication masts are in the vicinity of a crime scene. So you can therefore investigate which mobile devices may have connected to them during the time frame of a crime. So on the map, I've got my location of my crime scene. I've also got the location of my nearby cell sites, and I can use the GIS to establish if any of the cell sites are in range of that crime scene, so we can then gather that vital data from them. And so here I'm going to return back to the process operations and create a workflow using 2 steps. So the first step is buffer. Because I want to create a buffer of each of the cell sites based on its signal range, and the cell site data has that value, so I can select that column in the data. And then once those buffers are created, I just want to see the overlap of the cell site signal. So I'm going to use an intersect command as well. So my process is made up of a buffer and an intersect. So I'm going to create the result of this process as a new layer, and we'll call this cell site intersect, and then when I run that process, we've got our new layer, and we can see that this area does actually overlap the crime scene. Now, just to also show you, you can also use other processing operations to create sectors for the cell site signals, and this example here is using the range and the bearing of the signals to show the signal coverage for these cell sites. And very quickly, I can just click on each of these cell site sectors, and we can see where it is overlapping on the crime scene. So that was an example of using processing operations for cell site analysis. Now, all of the different analysis techniques that I've shown you so far have been performed in CAD Corp SIS Desktop. The data I've shown you, including the analysis that I've performed, can all be shared across your organization to a wider audience using a web mapping solution. So CAD Corp SIS Web Map is designed to be an easy-to-use web mapping application for sharing geographical information via a browser. And in simple terms, the map itself is made up of 2 types of data. So the first is sort of our base mapping, and here I've got the Ordnance Survey mapping again. And if I zoom into the map, we'll switch between the zoom stack product, which we see here, to the OS master map data, which is that really detailed data from the Ordnance Survey. And you'll notice that the performance of the mapping is really fast, and that's what users expect. And that's because the CAD Corp solution is serving the data as a web map tile service. And that service, can be consumed within the CAD Corp web map application here, but it can also be consumed by your other applications within your organization as well. And one example may be SmartStorm. Then the second type of data is just the business data and the analysis that you want to publish and make available in the map. And if I go to my map features, I can view that data and analysis. And as an example, maybe I want to view crimes that have occurred within the last 24 hours. So we can see them represented on the map here. But it's not just about viewing data. There is also functionality to analyze data as well. And one example is to use our search by area functionality. And this basically allows you to perform sort of geographical, spatial searches on your data to find data within an area of interest. So on the left here, I want to run a search on crimes that have occurred within the last 24 hours. And then right at the bottom, you've got a number of different ways to define your area of search. So you can draw a freehand area on the map, which is the example I'm about to show you. You can select a feature, so you can say, oh, let's select this ward boundary and find all the crimes in the last 24 hours within that ward boundary. Or you can simply just drop a point on the map with a buffer of say 100 meters and just find everything within that search area. So I'm going to draw my area of interest just as a freehand area. And when I double click to finish, very quickly it's found all of the crimes within the last 24 hours within that defined area, and then presents the results to me in this table view. So at the top we can see 26 crimes were found within that search. I can filter the data, so maybe I'm interested in seeing only anti-social behaviour type crimes, and I can see there were 10 within the last 24 hours in the area. And then finally, with your results, you can choose to print this as a map, or you can download that analysis out to a CSV file as well. So you can actually use that spatial analysis and the results outside of the application. So Search by Area is a really powerful tool that allows you to perform those spatial and sort of geographical searches on your data, but in a really sort of user-friendly way. WebMap also offers another way to provide analysis at a location, and that is the local knowledge web service. Now the service basically takes my current location on the map, runs some queries against your data in the background, and then presents the results of those queries to me on the left-hand side. And these can be based on commonly asked questions or maybe operational KPIs. So my first example here is a simple sort of a point in polygon type test. So what local policing team is in this area, and I've created this as a hyperlink so I could go out to the relevant page on the website and see who makes up the policing team for this particular area. Underneath I've got stats showing sort of the top 3 crime types, and we've got comparison to the previous month so we can see if there's any trends. The next example is looking at really sort of locality information. Locally, how many crimes have there been? What's the population? So that's data from the ONS, and we can create a statistic, how many crimes there are per 1,000 population. More stats looking at our performance, so number of 999 and 101 calls. And then moving away from stats, we can use it to do like a find my nearest type search. In this example, it's telling me the nearest police station, how many cells are available. And if I click on that result, then the map takes me to that location and we can see some additional information there as well. And then finally, just another example of a find my nearest type search. This is CCTV data. And at the bottom, you can also incorporate social media feeds there as well. But those are just some examples of what you can do with local knowledge. But this is just it's a great way to summarize data by location and be able to provide sort of a picture of performance to your colleagues in your organization. And then finally, just beyond sharing data in a web mapping solution like CAD Club WebMap, you can also share data via a CAD Club map integrated with Microsoft Power BI. And Power BI is a great tool for reporting and visualizing data. And my example here is connecting to the same data that I've just shown you for the Plymouth area. On the left-hand side of my report is made up of visuals from Microsoft Power BI, which allows me to analyze and filter the data in the report. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the CAD Club map. And each blue pin represents the location of these crimes that we can see here. And the benefit of having that map inside your report is that it just gives you another opportunity to see or have a sort of geographical perspective to the data that you're reporting on. So with the visuals on the left-hand side, maybe I want to analyze the data and look at crimes that occurred within the Sutton and Mount Gold ward. So if I apply that filter, all of the visuals update, but the map updates as well. So the map is now focused on the 108 crimes that are within this particular ward area. And the benefit of the CAD Club integration is that you can see Ordnance Survey mapping here, so you can use that alongside your business data. But you can also publish business data in the map as well. And in this example, I've got the results of the GIStar analysis that I showed you in the desktop GIS, which you can turn on and off here within our layer switcher here. And then finally, you can hover over the pins on the map as well. So it's all interactive. So this provides us a little pop-up showing us some information about crime here. Or you can simply click on the pin on the map, and that actually filters the Power BI visuals in the report. So we can see informational analysis about that particular crime that we've clicked on. And that was just another example there of just being able to use a map in another way to consume and analyze data geographically. And that also concludes my demonstration this morning. So I've shown you a number of techniques for visualizing and analyzing crime data using CAD Club desktop. And then we looked at some of the capabilities to then share that information with your colleagues through either web mapping using CAD Club WebMap or integrating with other platforms like Microsoft Power BI. So thank you for watching. I'm now going to pass you back over to Gary and we'll answer any questions you may have raised during the webinar. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Simon. That was really, really interesting. Let me just share my screen. As I mentioned at the start, Simon and I are both going to turn our cameras on for this session as well, and I'm just going to make a change here so that I can see Simon as well. That helps. So show all webcams. That's good. So yeah, thanks Simon for that. We covered a lot of ground. So Simon gave us a bit of information about lots of subjects, and I suppose as we'd expected and as we hoped, there's been a lot of questions coming through. So we're going to try in the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to try and deal with as many of those questions as we can. So I'll start with there's one about hotspot mapping. So there was a question about the GIStar technique and if it's possible to have training on that. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I suppose this answer applies to anything that Simon's shown today. So we have a training manager at CAD called Phil Atkinson, who many people might know, and he manages our training portfolio. And there's a long list of sort of off-the-shelf courses that we run, but we also can run training on specific subjects. So if you've been watching today and think, what I'd really like is training on GIStar and temporal mapping and thematic maps, then we can organise training for that. So please just mention that in the survey, and we'll pick that up. There's a question that's coming from Richard about asking if the demo is recorded. So yes, it was. So we've recorded the all of the webinar today. So later on, you'll get an email with a link to download the recording. So that will be on its way to you. Simon, there's a question that perhaps you could answer, which is about if it's possible to customize the local knowledge interface that you showed.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yep. So the local knowledge interface is completely configurable. It's just all about the data, really. So you've got the data, you've got the questions that you want to ask. Then you just apply a variety of different sort of spatial techniques against your data to provide the output that I showed you. So it could be a point and polygon test, could be a find my nearest, could be finding stats within 500 meters of a location. So yep, completely configurable, and also the visual in terms of displaying those results again is completely configurable by yourself as well, and we would help you implement that local knowledge service for you as well, just to get you started.
Great, thank you, Simon. There's a question about Power BI. So we're using Power BI. We have Bing Maps. How do we use Ordnance Survey data? Yeah, so for people that aren't using Power BI, or people that do, so by default it comes for free with Bing Maps, which you can use for your Power BI visuals. What CAD Club has developed and what Simon showed is a CAD Club Power BI visual, which probably has 3 main advantages over using Bing Maps. So firstly, it allows you to directly read your crime data in using eastings and northings, so you don't have to translate that to latitude and longitude, which is good. So that's one less step to go through. It also has the full stack of Ordnance Survey data, so it's not Bing data, it's OS data using your PSGA license, and that includes master map, which is obviously really useful if you've got if you want to analyze data at building level or at close proximity. And finally, I think Simon actually showed that during the presentation. It does allow you to add background overlays, so that could be beat overlays or hotspot maps as well. So that is that's good. Let me see. I've got a question after you, Simon. I'll pass it to you. So it was Peter, spotted that you had a what 3 words icon in, I think, in WebMap. Is it possible to use what 3 words in WebMap, Simon?
Yep, so we've got an integration with what 3 words in WebMap, and it works 2 ways. So you can click a point on the map and it will tell you the what 3 words address. Or if you've got a what 3 word address, you can type that in and that will take you to the location on the map.
Excellent, thanks, Simon. There's another question from Richard. Thanks, Richard, about integrating with Qlikview. I've not come across that myself, Richard, but integration with CAD Club software and other applications is generally really straightforward. So we have a few options. So we're really good at integrating with other applications at the data level. So on our website, we didn't really cover it today, but on our website, there's a list of 300 different file formats that CAD Club can connect directly to, and that includes web services and direct connection to databases. So that's one option. But also in WebMap, Simon used a technique in the PowerBI, which is called embedded map, which can be used in a variety of other systems. So I will look into that particular application and come back to you. But I imagine either at the data level or using the embedded map option will provide an option to link to that application. There's a question here from a housing association about they've got a cloud first strategy and can desktop be hosted in the cloud? Okay, so yes, both. So traditionally, well, for the last 3 or 4 years, CAD Club has been offering web mapping as an option for either cloud hosted managed by CAD Club, and when we're hosting it, we take responsibility for updating it and keeping in line with the latest releases. So we have that option, or it can be on premise, which is maybe the more traditional way of deploying web mapping. But it was last summer, so about maybe just over a year ago, we also released support for CAD Club Sys Desktop in the cloud. So Simon used Sys Desktop at the start of the presentation, and that can be hosted by CAD Club in the cloud. And again, with that option, we take responsibility for keeping the application in line with the current release, which means that when we bring out new software which has things like GIStar or creating videos for temporal data, you get access to that functionality straight away. You don't have to wait for maybe your IT team to update you or upgrade you or whatever the process is in your organization. The questions keep coming. I'm going to answer one more and then see how the time looks. So there's a question about we've got mentioned briefly the average speed data and about different times of day. So that is a really good question. So the Ordnance Survey average speed data, I think it's split into 4 different time segments. So they are, for example, like 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, or that type of segment. So they try and capture times on the network where speeds are going to be different. For obviously, with that example for commuting traffic, or maybe a bit earlier than that. So when you're carrying out routing analysis using the Ordnance Survey average speed data, then you can take into account different times of day. So if you want to look at how long it takes for Simon's route at 7 o'clock in the morning compared to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can do that. And like I mentioned, if people do want to quote for the average speed data, then just drop us a line and we can do that, which is good. Another question's just come in from Emily about, is the webinar being recorded? So yes, it's being recorded, Emily, and we'll get you the recording to you so you can rewatch it in detail. You can press pause and see, go through some of the techniques Simon did in slow motion, and obviously share with your colleagues as well. So that's good. I think I think I've ticked off all of the questions, which is great. So I think what we'll do is I have got one slide left, which what I want to do is just to summarize what we've shown, and then we'll bring the webinar to a close, and you'll be able to complete the exit survey. So the summary of the things that I wanted just to make sure we got across today is that Simon used CAD Club Sys Desktop, which is a desktop GIS, and that can be used for all aspects of GIS crime analysis, from sort of entry-level users to advanced functionality. And some of the advanced functionality you showed, such as GIStar or creating those videos, is included as standard in the product without any add-ons. So all of our customers have got access to that functionality, which is great. Second part of the summary, which is sort of things that we want you to sort of take away and try and remember, is Assist WebMap is really great for sharing crime maps. And Simon showed some examples, and that can be shared within the browser or an embedded map, which is what I mentioned in my response to Richard about linking to other applications. Embedded map is an ideal way of doing that. If you'd like to arrange a follow-up meeting, then please, in the questionnaire, click that option, and it'd be great to discuss these techniques in more detail or answer any of the questions that you might think of once this webinar is closed. And finally, I know we have covered, we've touched on lots of techniques in a very sort of short period of time to give you that overview this morning. So I'm well aware that you might be thinking that you want more help with some of those techniques. So we are running online training on any of the topics that we've discussed today. So what we're going to do in the next 20 seconds, I'm going to bring the webinar to a close. But before I do that, I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your day today to join CAD Club for this webinar. It's really appreciated. There will be the exit survey at the end, so please do complete that. That'd be really appreciated. And there's our contact details on the screen as well. So if you want to call us or email us, then do that, and we'll aim to get back to you as soon as possible. So on behalf of myself and Simon, and also my colleague Gwen, who's our marketing manager, who's done all the organising in the background, I'd like to thank you all for taking part today, and we wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.